Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These are live from the building and online every Friday at 1 o'clock, and they are part of our Open Studio Friday offer. Open Studio Friday is a time when we open our doors at 10 a.m, and anyone who wants to can come in and hot desk for the day and find out more about what we do, meet some residents, watch the talk, and then maybe hang around in the bar with us afterwards. My name's Luke. I am a white man with a big beard, short hair. I'm wearing a black top that says gaffer tape and hope in white writing. Nikesh, as you've probably noticed, isn't here. But he is joining us via the magic of the internet. He's not very well, so he's staying at home today, and he will appear on this screen soon. So yeah, sorry if you were expecting to see him in person, but he has decided to sit this out and take it easy, which is unlike Nikesh, who works extremely hard all the time. The talks cover everything from creativity and technology, and they look at projects in progress, which are in need of feedback, questions, and curious minds, or things that people are launching or working on. And Nikesh is going to talk today about his new book, Your Story Matters, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a moment. Who is here for the first time? Show of hands, no fear. Oh my God, that's wonderful. Right, for all of you who've heard this next bit before, get your smartphones out and share the link to the talk for us so more people can join us live. For those that haven't, here's a little bit more about what we do. The studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology with everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We are a partnership between the Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol, which is a rare thing for universities to collaborate in the same city. And we are a home for embryonic ideas, research and development, and the building of new companies. And we are a meeting place of both creative and commercial industries. I've been doing this for 3 years and I still don't know this off by heart, so just bear with me. We offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, professional development, creative development, all for our residents as part of our kind of foundation of generosity, which is one of the key principles of the studio, which is built upon the ideas of mutual exchange. So people don't pay to be here, but you ask people how to think they can be generous to each other and to the space in recognition of all that resource. Quick bit of housekeeping. Feel free to move around, make noise, eat your lunch, drink your tea. If you want a cup of tea at any point, help yourself. It's at the kitchen, it's at the back there. There's coffee as well. I think there's some left in the pot. I can't tell from here. There is a quiet space just to the left here if you should need it for any reason. You do not need to explain. Just go in and help yourself. It's an access resource. Fire exits are either end of the studio. If we do need to use those, one of us will help you find it, so don't worry too much about that. And there's an accessible toilet and baby change in the corridor next to the kitchen. So Nikesh will be here soon, don't worry, on screen. A captioned and recorded version of the talk will be available on YouTube after this talk has finished. For those of you watching online, hello, welcome. If you would like a subtitled version of the talk, head over to our Facebook page now and type Pervasive Media Studio in Facebook to find us, and you'll find auto captions there. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio. Twitter at PMStudioUK, or on Instagram at Pervasive Media Studio. And now, I'd like to introduce Nikesh. In this talk, Nikesh, who is a former editor of Rife Magazine, which is based in the building, be here, and now a studio resident, author, editor, and writer in his own right. He's going to be talking about his new book on writing, Your Story Matters, and we'll show how easy it is to tell stories well and why it matters. There's questions, Q&A at the end. Nikesh has a little creative writing task for you to do at some point. That's why you've got paper. We will find some more pens, don't worry. I know there's only 4 in the tin at the back. We will find some more in a second. If you have any questions on YouTube at any point, drop them in the chat and I'll pick them out to ask Nikesh at the end. If you've got questions in the room, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. Speak nice and clearly. There's a microphone directly above you so we don't have to move around too much because of COVID, but speak towards that microphone to help it pick it up. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Nikesh.
Hello. I can't actually see anyone, so I don't know if this is... I can now see people. Hello. I can just see myself. Hi, everyone. I'm very sorry to not be here. Got one of these guys. So sorry about that. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I really wanted to be there because running workshops on Zoom is weird. So yeah, I'm here to talk about a new book that I've just put out called Your Story Matters, which is a book about writing. It's a book that kind of uh, started life when I was working at Watershed with Rife Magazine. It was the first time I'd sort of started teaching people. And being a writer, I read lots of writing books, or books about writing or craft books. And one of the things that I've always noticed about those books is that they are very, very much this is structure, this is how to write a thing. And none of them ever really teach you much about the thing that brought you to the page in the first place, which is your storytelling instinct. That's why I think books like the artist's way are really good, because they really get you to dig deeper than just sort of here is a midpoint, this is how to do setting and all the rest of it. So I've been teaching at Faber Academy in London for the last couple of years, teaching a writing a novel course, and I've also taught at universities and in schools and at the Arvon Foundation and on various residentials. And I just felt like the thing that we the thing that we forget when we're telling stories is why we're telling them in the first place. I think we often have an idea and then commit it to page, and we forget that crucial bit of why are we doing this? And also, like in times of global uncertainty, there's probably this feeling like, what's the point? Why does anyone care about my little story when there's X, Y, and Z going on in the world? And I disagree with that. I think that there has never been a more important time to tell stories. We in the UK specifically in the last 5 years, there have been lots of conversations in publishing and in media about the kind of the existence of the monocultural story, and and I think the more people tell stories, the more chance we have of learning more about ourselves, learning more about the lens through which we see the world. And whether we tell those stories for ourselves or whether we tell them for an audience, it matters. So I'm going to read a short bit from the book, from Your Story Matters, a thing called Why We Tell Stories. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about intention, and then I'm going to get you guys to do a short writing exercise, and then I will take questions, and hopefully it will all be fluid and like I'm there in the room. So yes, why do we tell stories? Why are we compelled to tell stories? This is a question I sit with a lot. What is the function of a story, of fiction, of journalism, of recording a life experience for you in some form? Can writing ever truly teach us empathy? Should it be a mirror to show ourselves who we are? Should it be a window into the universes of others? What about entertainment? Could it be all these things? None of these things. What expectations should we place on a story, on the storyteller? Can a screenwriter create a world in a technical schematic or script? Can sci fi offer escape or parallels? What about non fiction? Can it ever escape the limits of its writer's lens in order to tell us objectively about ourselves? Do blogs change the world? Why do stories matter? These are big questions, and if there were an easy answer, believe me, I'd just say it here and retire. But I tell stories to make sense of the world as I see it. The world I've lived and experienced, read about and heard about, and what I want it to be. I tell stories to make sense of myself. Most stories tend to wrestle with a question, a big central thematic question. Some stories frame those questions as an argument and posit two characters on either side of it. Often those questions can be boiled down to one or all three, to one of three things. Who am I? Who could I be? Who should I be? In a lecture titled The I Who Is Not Me, Zadie Smith, author of several critically acclaimed books from novels and essays to short stories, said that fiction asks, what if things were other than they are? What if I was different than I am? Stories here ask us to look within and question not who we are in the present, but also who we have the capacity to be. It's not stretching the truth to say that a good story, a heartfelt story, one that bleeds on the page, a story that isn't written from a position of intellectual superiority, will ask questions about identity. Stories can explore the central question of identity. using patterns and structures that are familiar to push characters to see something within themselves that has been untapped for a long time. And through that lens, the important points of the character's journey, we get to understand the world around us and our place in it, the depths and limits and expanse of the human condition. To quote a terrible Oasis album, we get to understand what it is to be here now. We can argue later about whether it is a terrible album or not. Don't think I've actually listened to it since it came out. Maybe it's unfair. Maybe it's aged well. Patterns and structures, especially in stories, help us find meaning and purpose. Stories help us interrogate and understand the past, the present, and the future. Stories give us hope and they cause us pain, both in the writing and in the reading. They entertain us and they challenge us. And through the experience of the narrative, we can contemplate change within ourselves and understand the world better. I am compelled to tell stories because I don't have a better way of understanding the world and my place in it. I was useless at science and maths. I remember being so frustrated with various teachers for making the answers to these incomprehensible equations seem obvious. The way they taught me maths, there was correct and incorrect and no messiness in between. The answer was obviously 3.353 or osmosis or Starman, and there was no argument, and I was made to feel stupid for not knowing the answer or understanding how we got there. Many writers are writers because they have been readers for so long, endlessly chasing the perfect story before deciding it was high time they write it for themselves. Or they read voraciously and hate everything they read, never able. Sorry, excuse me. This is the most I've talked in days. Never able to find that perfect balance of character, plot, story, and setting that hits all their buttons. The author Chinua Achebe, who wrote the astounding novel Things Fall Apart, famously said, "If you don't like someone's story, write your own." I was a shy kid, hanging out in my bedroom most of the time, reading and waiting until I was allowed to watch television. The alternative to television was comics, and when comics weren't available, it was movie tie-in books and Star Trek novelizations and Star Wars expanded universe novels. They were like TV, except you set the pace in your head. These books were gateway drugs for me. Once I had read all the Han Solo novels stocked in my local library, I moved on to thrillers and sci-fi, hoping to find someone as much as I loved Han Solo. And as I became a teenager, I widened my reading habits in order to find sex scenes in novels to satisfy my raging hormones. Don't judge me, you have done this yourself. Weirdly, it was being a teenage boy in the pre-internet era, in search of sex scenes to read or watch. God, I can't believe I'm reading this out loud to a room full of strangers over a television screen. But there we go. Maybe I can't hear the awkwardness in the room, and that will make it easier for us to get to the next bit. I'm going to reference sex a lot over the next couple of pages. Weirdly, it was being a teenage boy in the pre-internet era, in search of sex scenes to read or watch, that brought me to some of my favourite authors and filmmakers. I discovered Spike Lee, hoping there would be sex scenes and Do the Right Thing. Instead, I was witness to an intense and brilliant story about community, responsibility, race, and gentrification. I read Madame Bovary because I read about its sex scenes in a book for teenagers called The Amazing and Death-Defying Diary of Eugene Dingman. It was the search for sex that brought me to stories. It's funny to think that this, of all things, is what led me to read widely. My search for sex led me to a book that changed my life and made me realise I had my own voice. That book was The Buddha of Suburbia by Hanif Qureshi. It had loads of sex in it, and it was funny. And it was written by a brown guy, which, for the time I found it, in the world in which I sought to come of age, was mind blowing. It begins, "My name is Kareem Amir, and I am an Englishman born and bred, or almost. I'm often considered to be a funny kind of Englishman, a new breed, as it were, having emerged from two old histories." That almost was the line that got me, the way it rattled around in my head, helping me understand something I was in the process of figuring out myself. I remember the day I got that book out of the library. I'd seen trailers for the BBC Two television show, starring a young, beautiful Naveen Andrews, soundtrack by David Bowie, and thought, there's no way my parents are going to let me watch that. It looked like it was filled with sex and drugs and rock and roll, and it was definitely not the type of thing I'd want to sit next to my mum and dad and watch in our one television mid-90s household. Also, the timer function on our video recorder was erratic. Also, I would need to start recording the show while mum and dad were watching the news, and I couldn't risk either of them flicking over to see what I was taping during the local segment. I needed to watch it though. I needed to see this outsider brown kid on this show. All this flashed through my head as I watched the trailer, increasingly despondent that I'd never get to watch the programme. Then came the title card, based on the novel by Hanif Qureshi. Aha, a loophole. I realised I could get this book out of the library. My family did not do things together very often. We didn't eat together, we didn't do weekend day trips together, we didn't sit and talk about our days together. My parents worked 7 days a week on a small business with my dad's brother, both too tired to do anything other than feed my sister and me, insist we did our homework and remind us of our responsibilities, speak good English, study hard, and be polite and grateful. We watched sitcoms together when we went to the library together. My mum and I watched anything with a laughter track growing up. Desmond's, Only Fools and Horses, The Real McCoy, Red Dwarf, whatever we could find. There was a comfort in laughing at the tragedies and misfortunes of others, because, as my mum once put it, the only thing left separating our lives from a sitcom is a studio audience. She would joke with me about Dad's business and the various things that would go wrong between two brothers with the best intentions and different styles, who acted like smooth business people but had to act as if everything else in that warehouse, but also had to act as everything else in that warehouse, from courier, cleaner, and order packer to HR. She said they were the original Del Boy and Rodney. She'd cast her mind over to the other side of the room where my father sat in silence with a tumbler of whiskey, listening to the sad, mournful tones of Ruffy, loud enough that we watched everything with subtitles on. The lesson I learnt from those sitcoms I watched with Mum was that amongst all the pain and hardship, life was inherently funny. The other thing we did as a family was go to the library together. There, my library card gave me free rein. I could go wherever I wanted, nothing was off limits. Mum needed 50 minutes to find new Mills and Boon books to read, and my sister would curl up in a beanbag and stare into space. I could venture into any section I wanted and pick any book I wanted. I'm not saying for a second that every character in a book needs to look like you in order for you to enjoy it. All I'm saying is that at critical times in your life, where you feel like a weirdo, an outsider, someone who doesn't belong, someone alone, be it when you're a kid, a teenager, a young adult, or at another transitional time in your life, seeing a version of yourself can be the biggest comfort in the world. This brown boy who felt weird and unattractive and unloved and unliked and different to everyone else around him needed to see a version of that somehow. So at the library, when I saw the name of the author, Hanif Qureshi, I was taken back. It was a brown person's name. It felt comforting to me to see a familiar name on the cover of a book. In print, it was tangible. It was real. It could be held. Wasn't Mr. Qureshi the name of the guy with the Datsun who drove around northwest London in the 80s renting out pirated Bollywood VHS tapes to South Asian families from his boot? Qureshi felt like family. I opened the book, scanned the opening lines there and there, saw that almost. I can remember the feeling as I read that word, wrapping itself around me like the orange shawl my bar used to balance on her shoulders. It made me feel less alone. It was 1993, and I felt like a funny kind of Englishman. I was increasingly caught between two worlds. At home, I found myself speaking Gujarati less and less. I was discovering rap and Bhangra, and if I was not working with my parents in their warehouse, I was at the odd daytime rave at weekends. Always overheard was the heavy imperative: work hard and take over the family's business. Qureshi's almost got me. Finally, an acknowledged duality, a nuanced fluidity, a spectrum. I didn't have to be one or the other. I could be in between. I could be almost. After the Buddha of Suburbia, I diligently scanned the spines of every single volume in the adult section of the library, looking for other South Asian names. That book changed my life. It said everything I felt, saw through a lens I recognized, and felt made me feel less like a weirdo. It unlocked something in my reading. Though I didn't find another South Asian name for a while, I found myself tearing through Crime and Punishment, Middlemarch, Brave New World, Adrian Mole. Instead of movie and TV tie-ins, I was reading more of the world. I was heading through time and space, through country and county. I learned about myself, other people, different cultures, my own culture. In White Teeth, Zadie Smith writes, "There was England, a gigantic mirror, and there was Irie without reflection. Books are mirrors, and I found my reflection in the Buddha of Suburbia. It was enough to show me that I belonged. Thanks to a library, I am almost, and that is enough for me. And that's why, for me, stories matter. Whether they offer you escape or comfort, Whether they expand your view of the world or cement it, a story can change your life. So that's basic one of the opening chapters from the book that kind of just lays out why I think telling stories matters. And the other short extract that I wanted to read for you is just a little bit about the kind of the manifesto of the book. Um, this would be much more interactive if I didn't have COVID and I was there in person, by the way. So apologies, you've come to a glorified reading, but you know. Okay, so your story matters. In this book, I will help you write it, edit it, hone it, own it, and put it out into the world. There'll be advice, new ways of thinking, and plenty of exercises. By the end of this book, you will have your story written in front of you. I'm a big believer in offering practical help because writing is hard. Writing a novel is hard. Writing an essay is hard. Writing this book you're listening to right now was hard. Writing is hard. I often listen to writers talk about how much they hate writing. And I don't think it's because they actually hate writing. I think it's because writing is hard and it can reduce you to a monosyllabic, inarticulate spacehead sometimes. A disconnect happens between the perfect thought in your head and how it gets represented on the page. There is slippage between brain and typing fingers. And if you don't want to come undone by this slippage, you need practical help. Super short lessons and prompts to help you create what you want to find. So I look at storytelling in the following ways. Have the idea, work out your intentions in writing it, trust your instincts through the tricky first draft, be mindful of structure and technique in subsequent drafts, edit, edit, edit. Yes. So that's the book. The other thing I was going to talk to you about was a realization that I had a couple of years ago that I think for those of you who are in this room because you tell stories, I'd written three novels before I was taught this very, very simple thing, and I'm going to share it with you in the simplest way I can because I think it's an important thing. When I talk about story, I'm not talking about plot. Often when people talk about story, they talk about event, what happens, but story is what the thing is about. So if we imagine as storytellers, as creatives, in the business of telling stories, there is a degree to which we're telling a story, telling what is actually going on, and we're using plot to tell the story. And there's a difference between the two, which is something I never actually knew before. So if we imagine we're in the imagination business, right? We're in the imagination business, and story and plot are two different things. So if we imagine story is the thing that it's really about, and plot is the thing that that happens, anything can happen. So with plot, absolutely anything can happen. A meteorite can hurtle towards Earth, and the only people who can save the humanity are a group of ragtag industrial drillers, like in Armageddon. Or a boy and a girl can fall in and out of love over 3 years at a prestigious Dublin college. Or people can rebuild humanity following a pandemic. Anything can happen with story. And the thing about the anything happening is that's where the fun happens. We decide where to take the story. But the thing that it's really about, that's the thing that really matters to readers. That's the thing that ties the reader to the plot. Because if anyone's read a Dan Brown book, they're fun books to read, but they're ultimately like popcorn. There's so much running, jumping, climbing trees. The guy runs over to this part of Rome, and there's a statue, and the statue's pointing to this painting, and the painting holds a key that's going to lead him back to a crypt, and he's going to unlock the crypt and find a secret file that's going to lead him to the. There's so much going on, and then before you know it, there's a pope jumping out of a helicopter, and he's locked in a crypt, and all the rest of it. Like in Dan Brown books, they're full of plot, they're full of event. And when we finish the book, we finish the story, we kind of go, okay, great, I experienced that. I'm slightly exhausted for the experience, but that's about it. What do we ever really know about any of the protagonists in the Dan Brown book, we know that the famous iconographer Robert Langdon is a bit claustrophobic. That's probably about it. But because there's nothing tying us to the story. There's no story. There's no journey for Robert Langdon. It kind of feels like it kind of feels empty. So Kurt Vonnegut, if you go on YouTube and you look up The Shape of Stories, Kurt Vonnegut has this excellent talk, this 17-minute talk where he talks about the shape of stories. And one of them, he draws a line like this, and he goes, "Man in a hole. Man finds himself in a hole and digs his way out and is better off for the experience." And that is a very neat way of saying that, like, where stories where that have some sort of human impact, that have some sort of thing to overcome, that resonate with a part of someone's humanity. Those are the things that readers really care about, that audiences really care about. So when you're thinking about think about what it's really about. What's the journey that you're taking your readers on? Who are the characters that you're using to tell this story? What is the central thematic question at the heart of the thing that you're trying to tell? And because I didn't realize that there was a different story and plot, whenever someone would go, whenever someone would, like an agent or a TV exec would say, "What's this about?" And then well, it's about this guy who goes here, then like a zombie attack happens, and then and they're like, "No, but what's it really about?" And that's where you'd get a bit lost, because, as we said, stories can be about anything. What's it really about? What is the thing? So, you temple a film like Independence Day. Sure, it's about an alien attack on the entire world, but because you're telling a story at a global level that's affecting absolutely everyone in the world. How on earth are you going to get readers to care, or viewers to care about what happens in the film? Well, you have, is Goldblum going to make up with his? Is Will Smith going to find his family? Is the drunk guy going to prove to his kids that he's a hero? Is the president going to get over the grief of his wife? Or are they going to die at the hands of a bunch of aliens? And those are the stories that really tie us to the film Independence Day. We're not watching it for the big explosions or the daring space battles. We're watching it to see people overcome small universal human truths before the world ends, and what it does is it gives us the stakes. It gives us why it matters that they overcome this big global event, because they have small things going on in their lives that speak to something within all of us. So always think about story and plot, what I'm trying to say. I'm going to get you guys to do a little writing exercise now. This is an exercise from the book. So those of you who are watching online, if you can get up a Word document or a notebook, those of you who are watching this in the studio, you've got paper with you. So what I want you to do is I'm going to make the assumption that the majority of you have a smartphone. So what I'd like you to do is get your smartphones out, and I would like you to scroll back in your camera roll to sorry, excuse me. Scroll back in your camera phone to the first photograph in your camera roll. Make sure it's an appropriate photograph for being in public if you're in the studio. And what I want you to do is just look at that photograph. I want you to remember the moment that it was taken. I want you to remember who took the photograph. I want you to remember what was happening on that day, what happened after the photograph was taken, what happened in the lead up to the photograph. And once you've just spent a couple of minutes just in your head trying to recreate the moment that this was taken, what I want you to then do is just tell me the story of what happened after the photograph was taken.
Nikesh, can you hear me right?
Yeah.
Could you repeat that, but just a bit more slowly? Just you're breaking up ever so slightly, and one or two people would just like to hear it again.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
So what I'd like you to do is find a photograph early in your camera roll. Look at the photograph, make sure it's work appropriate. And I want you to just take a few seconds to remember where you were when that photograph was taken, what was happening around you. Basically, don't use like a picture of Robert Pattinson or like a meme or anything. So it's got to be a photograph that either you've taken or someone has taken that involves you in some way. I want you to try and remember the moment that the photograph was taken, what was happening before it was taken, what was happening in the moment the photograph was taken. I want you to imagine the photograph being taken, and I want you to now, for 10 minutes, just do some free writing on what happened next. Try and tell me the significance of that photograph. Like, why was that photo? Why did that photograph need to be taken? But use things like who, what, where, and when, and why, and all the rest of it, and just really delve into the moment that the photograph was taken. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Nikesh. Does anyone need that again? No? Cool.
Cool.
If anyone needs a pen, they are
We'll check
of
back in.
varying quality and size. Okay, for anybody who's just joined us on the YouTube stream, we're just doing creative writing. You can skip slightly back because you have the power of the internet in your hands and find out what that task was if you'd like to join in, or check out the recording of the talk, which should be available not too long after the broadcast is finished. Nikesh, will you give us a time warning when you're ready? Can you hear me? Nikesh, how long do people have left? It's like live TV, isn't it? So smooth. Nikesh, can you hear me? I think it's safe to say he can't, so we'll just wait till he comes back.
Okay, you have 5 minutes left, everyone.
There we go.
Okay, just a couple more minutes, everyone. I don't know if anyone can hear me. Okay, everyone. Do you want to just finish up your thoughts? Um, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Hello? Is this thing on?
Yeah, we can hear
I have no idea if this microphone is live right now.
you. We can hear you, Nikesh. If you can hear me, we can hear you. Hopefully he hasn't just muted his speakers. Can you hear me, Nikesh? It's going to be quite critical for the Q&A. No, I can hear him. It's fine. This is hilarious. This is like watching someone else on a Zoom call, isn't it? Like, it's not the immersive experience we were going for. Jack, how are we doing? Hear me?
Okay. Okay, I can't actually see anyone. So I'm just going to carry on with the assumption that you are there. So what I want you to do with this, I know this was just a very quick exercise, but what I want you to do with this is take it away from here. And I want you to attempt a second draft that basically tells me the story of the photograph. I want you to use that photograph to tell me the story that tells that just gives me a little bit of a life. That just gives me a moment in your life with a bit of narrative of how you're feeling, often the disconnect between the photograph that's recorded and how we're feeling in the moment is quite an interesting one. So go ahead, go back and work on this. I'm just going to read another short extract from the book about intention setting, and then I'll throw it out to questions, and hopefully then we'll let you get on your way. Okay, so setting our intentions is important. We need to know why we tell stories. Why we need to know why we're telling the stories we want to tell or even need to tell. It's helpful to create something like a mission statement. So here are some questions to ask yourself. 4 questions. Why this? Why me? Why now? Who for? You need to know the answers to these questions. The answers will get you through the hard times, the slow times, the I can't make this goddamn scene work times, and the inevitable rejection times. All approaches are valid. There are no right or wrong answers here, but knowing the answers to these questions will help you. So let's break this down. 1. Why this? This could have been a poem, a tweet, a conversation, a film, a stray thought, a journal entry, an Instagram caption, a novel, a screenplay, a short story. So why this? Why this story? And why tell it in the form you have chosen? What are your reasons for choosing to write a personal essay or narrative nonfiction? Or what is it about the story that requires a novel length interrogation? Why do these characters need 300 pages of obstacles? Why? Why does this story demand um, that you tell it? Um, Sorry, just dealing with some technical stuff. Why does the story demand that you tell it? Write down why you're choosing the form you're choosing. Why a novel? Why not another form? Why a short story? Why a screenplay? Be sure of why this is the story you have to tell and why this is your way of telling it. Why this way? 2. Why me? Why do you need to write this? Why do you need to write this? If you don't write it, who will? Will anyone else? Will it stretch you? Will it stretch culture? Will it stretch the world? Do you bring a particular expertise or worldview? Is this something that happened to you? Is there something happening in the world right now and your unique take hasn't been explored yet? What is it about your viewpoint that we need? So ask yourself, why you? Write this down too. The trick is to not grandstand. Sometimes a story needs to be told because if you don't do it now, you won't ever do it, and then the story won't exist, and that would make you sad. You need it to exist. Sometimes a story needs to be told because you needed to find that story at the particular time of your life. Now, this is your opportunity to rectify the past absence by ensuring no one else feels that absence as well. Sometimes a story needs to exist because no one else will write it, and that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be told. Sometimes a story exists because you need to write it out of your system. Sometimes you write this story because others can't. They don't have the tools, the time, or the presence of mind to do it. Sometimes you bear witness. Sorry. There are many untold stories, and we have to tell them. I'm reminded of a quote from Arundhati Roy. There is really no such thing as the voiceless. There is only the deliberately silenced, or the preferably unheard. 3. Sorry. Oh dear. I'm very glad I can't see you all right now, because this is gross. 3. Why now? Some stories require distance. Some stories require closeness. Hindsight and reflection can radically alter stories. Being in the moment of a story, still living in it, in its consequences, its fallout, can affect a story. So, what is it about now that is compelling you to tell it? Is it to do with the world? You. So, why now? You know what I'm going to do. So, is there a story? Is there a conversation happening that your perspective can add to? Is the simple answer it's now or never? 4. Who for? Stories need readers. Who is the reader? Define them. Tease out what you know about them. This isn't for the faceless masses. This is for someone specific. Identify your reader. Write about who they are, why they need this story, and what you hope they will get from it. Sometimes the reader is you, and that is more than enough of a reason to do this. So when we tell stories, I always feel like setting those intentions first. can really, really help us to know why we're doing this in the first place. I don't know how we're going to do this next bit, but if anyone has any questions for me, before we do, Your Story Matters. It's out now. I'm hopefully COVID dependent doing an event at Bookhouse on Monday where I'll be in conversation with Vanessa Kasule. So please come to that if you can make it, or buy the book. Available from Storysmith or Gloucester Road Books or Bookhouse or Foyles or Waterstones, or the Arnolfini Bookshop. Thanks so much for attending. Sorry it was not in person. And if it had been in person, we would have done a few more writing exercises, which would have been fun. So I'm sorry I didn't get to do that with you. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please do ask.
Jack, how are we doing? Nikesh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hooray! We did it! Magic work, Jack. We don't know how we did it, but we did it. All right, okay, we have...
Well, actually, it's because I had the volume down.
I mean, it's fine, mate. Isn't the main colloquialism these days is you're on mute, right? So we're still dealing with that. So we've got 10 minutes for questions. Please don't hold back. Online, if you want to ask a question, pop it in the chat, and I'll pick it out. Who would like to pick Nikesh's brains? It's a rare.
I mean, if it's a mean question, then do hold back.
A mean question, yeah. Don't give him any feedback on the tech. That's not his fault. All right, I'll kick off and see if we can warm everyone up. Nikesh, what do you think of the phrase kill your darlings?
Yeah, it's the phrase "kill your darlings" is an interesting one because I think it's about ensuring that you don't treat your characters with so much reverence that you don't then push them through a journey that they deserve to. In order for your character, when we meet our characters in stories, they're often protecting something about themselves, sometimes rationally, sometimes irrationally, and that thing often serves to limit them. And a story often takes them on a journey, and pushes them to act out of character and destabilizes them. And if we treat our characters with too much reverence, then we won't ever really show them anything that's going to radically shape their world. So you kind of have to put your characters through the ringer a little bit. But also the phrase "kill your darlings" can also come into play when you're writing something that draws from real life, and you can get really, really hung up on and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened of real life. And if you don't free yourself from that and think about what the story is really about rather than what actually happened, you will end up with something that just feels like a journal or a diary entry. So killing your darlings is very much about just giving yourself the freedom in the text to take it where it needs to. There's also this thing of like when you're writing comedy, or certainly when you're working on sitcom stuff in rooms with other writers, you often find that you have to lose your funniest joke in order to move the plot forward, and that's always quite an interesting way of looking at Kill Your Darlings.
Thanks. Anybody like to far away? Yeah.
You mentioned you mentioned that there's a ratio between sort of plot and the story behind readings, things like that. And obviously your influence younger, and I can see in the background a lot of comic book sort of writing. Traditionally, or I feel like now that comic book style cinema writing stuff is very plot-thick rather than story heavy. Do you think that that's changed at all? Do you think that there's any sort of relevance in what the meaning behind original comics were, and if they influenced you at all with the meanings behind them originally?
Did you get that, Nikesh?
I heard the last bit. If you could repeat the middle.
So I think, in summary, there's a difference. You mentioned there's a difference between the plot and the story. And obviously you got a lot of influence from comic books and things like that. Do you think that there's been a change or a shift in the cinema and story and stuff between plot and story in comic books and things like that? So traditionally, like the story that was behind Batman or Spider-Man, or compared to the way it is portrayed now?
Yeah, I think what's interesting now is like there's obviously a lot of comic book stuff making it to the screens, and what I find interesting about that is like the way that the way that I used to read comics and still read comics is comics are sagas. You know, they're like soap operas. They continue and continue and continue, and like sometimes an entire issue takes place over 10 seconds in the adventure, and sometimes another issue can jump forward in time. And I think that the I do find it fascinating to see how comic book storytelling is influencing how we view stories. You see so much about this thing called the hero's journey, where you know, in short, like a lot of films, a lot of stories have this sort of hero's journey thing where person living their life at a disadvantage receives a gift in the form of external strength or an external power, which helps them to become the person that they're meant to be, and usually they need to overcome the thing that's deep within them in order to marry external strength and internal strength and become the superhero that they're meant to be. And you see that a lot in a lot of the stories that are being told at the moment. And obviously we're sort of inundated, like, and I say this as a Marvel fan and as a DC fan, but like we're sort of inundated with a lot of those stories, and I do like how some of them are reacting to the world that we live in. I don't want to get into some of the plot details of some of the films that are out at the moment, but they do definitely draw parallels with what's happening at the moment. I do think though that that structural thing, that sort of the hero origin, the hero's journey, the hero origin story can often mean that characters only really change because of cause and effect, because of choices that they've made rather than choices that exist in the world around us. You know, that it never really allows for a type of storytelling that is free of like man in a hole type decision making, if that makes sense. So sometimes for me it doesn't work. I'd love for us to have a bit more variety in the types of stories we have on our screens at the moment.
Thank you, Nikesh. Okay, we've got time for one more. Far away.
Hi Nikesh, thanks. I've really enjoyed that talk. I wondered in your kind of writing process, how much do you consider the reader and the decision points about the character making those relatable to the reader, and how much do you kind of indulge yourself and what you want to happen to the character? Is there a balance that you strike, or do you commit to one or the other?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting question. So, in terms of, I often think that words like relatability and authenticity and likability are real can be slightly misleading when it comes to storytelling. Like, I don't necessarily want my characters to be relatable because the obvious riposte to that is relatable to who. Um, and the other question I often get asked is that around likability, and I don't necessarily want my characters to be likable. I want them to be livable. I want them to feel like they exist in the world. And in order for our characters to feel livable and exist in the world, we need to make space for them to make complex decisions, to sometimes make bad choices for good with good intentions, or make good choices but have bad intentions. I think that writers do antagonists a disservice when they don't give their if they don't ever see the world from their antagonist's viewpoint. An antagonist should always have a reason to be doing the thing that they're doing, rather than just sort of the very shape, like the very Iago from Othello thing of motiveless malignity, which I sort of don't feel works. um I'm sure literature professors will come for me for saying that. But I think the thing with characters is often in the early drafts we just don't know them enough, and so we don't always let them live. We kind of have this schema of like the things that we want to put them through and the journey that we want to take them on, but we often just don't know them enough. We haven't considered their backstory. Things come to us as we write, and so part of my process is allowing myself to find things in the rewriting. I'm just working on a YA book at the moment where I threw up a bunch of backstory things in the first draft that I didn't actually end up doing anything with. Like in the first half of the manuscript, I just sort of threw up all of these things and thought I'll get to them later. And one of the comments from my editor was like, "These things don't pay off," and actually they were my attempts to try and find who this character was and why they might be the way they are, but actually the way I'm going to do that is sort of work out how they are in the world rather than like considering their backstory too much. So often the work gets done in the rewriting, and the first draft is just man, I can never remember their name. I'm so awful. But a writer once said that your first draft is like shoveling sand into a sandbox from which you will eventually make sculptures. And I really like that as an image, because sometimes that first draft is just getting the raw materials down and knowing that you can fix them in the edit.
Thank you, Nikesh. Can we have a massive round of applause for Nikesh? I hope you heard that, Nikesh, because it was heartfelt. Thank you so much for persevering through the COVID and for making time for us today, mate.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Buy the book. Thanks. Bye.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you for persevering with the technical difficulties. Jack, have you got the other slide? Yeah. So you'll notice this QR code is here and around the room and on that board over there. And if you're hot desking, I'm going to come and ask you to have a look at it. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes just to tell us what you think of the lunchtime talks and your experience of them. I mean, by all means, feedback on the technical issues today, but please be gentle. Next week's talk before you go is by Grace Quantock, and in this talk, the therapist, writer, and researcher and studio resident Grace is going to explore her research with cluster crew. Be BSL interpreted. And finally, before I let you stand up and go, next Friday is a really busy one because we have Open Studio Friday, as you've already heard about. We have the lunchtime talk, which Grace is doing, and then we have our winter residency showcase with artists Shruk El Attar and Alistair Gentry, who are going to be looking at dancing robots, flying saucers, and hopeful futures. You can get more info on that on our website. It's free, just you do need to book. Alistair and Shruk are very, very interesting and fun people, so please come along to that as well. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk, come find me or Danielle, who's going to wave her hand at the back there, and we will find you a space. If not, we'll see you all again, same time, same place next week. Thanks for coming, everyone.